Someone tell the story, someone sing the song. Every now and then the country goes a little wrong. Every now and then a madman's bound to come along. Doesn't stop the story, story's pretty strong. Doesn't change the song.
John Weidman, I guess one of the great things about working with Stephen Sondheim is that he truly believes that the play is the thing. It's interesting that he himself insists he can't write plays. Do you honestly believe that?
He certainly never tried, and it's interesting, early on in the almost endless process that was involved in finally creating Roadshow, after we'd done a workshop down at the New York Theater Workshop, and nobody knew what to do next, and nobody was sort of getting on. Steve said to me at one point, because I said, look, if you want to proceed with this without me, this was your idea in 1950, but and he said, I thought, maybe I would call Arthur Lawrence, and see if he could come over and give me sort of a course in playwriting over the course of 3 cocktail hours. And so I do think that he believes that there are a set of skills that are involved in creating a play which he does not have. Mm-hmm. And I think it is one of the things that makes him actually such a wonderful collaborator. I mean, his respect for his book writers and for the give and take, the ebb and flow, the way in which these people coming at the material from 2 different directions conspire to create the piece, I think is based on the fact that he has enormous respect for what he does, but also has an enormous respect for what the sort of playwriting part of it is.
Yeah. You've written the books for 3 of his shows, twice that number if you include all the Bounce Roadshow saga. You've said that he is satisfying to collaborate with. How does that collaboration work? So you've got an idea, you meet. How does it start?
Each of the shows that I've done with Steve, and I prefer to think of them as 3 as opposed to 3, but with an asterisk, each one has happened in a different way. Pacific Overtures is something which I have brought to Hal Prince as a straight play. Hal was going to do it as a straight play, changed his mind. He told me on the phone, because Boris Aronson said he didn't know how to design it, that it ought to be a musical. And so Hal then proceeded to sort of bully Steve into composing the score. And I mean, once Steve committed to it, he was fantastic. But in that case, Hal really operated as a figure at the center of a collaboration which always went through him and revolved around him. Assassins started with a conversation between me and Steve in his living room. I'd gone to him with an idea for a show that he was interested in, but I thought maybe it was a movie instead of a show. And he said, "What do you think about Assassins?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And we started talking, and that show was an author's piece in the purest sense. We met sort of once a week and just let our minds go. I mean, there was a period of time when we thought we would write a show about Lee Harvey Oswald. There was a period of time when we thought the array of characters would be even larger. Gradually, I realized that my connection to the material had to do with my experience of Kennedy's assassination when I was 17 years old, and then we narrowed the piece down. But by the time I went away to write a first draft, we really had... We sort of had the show that we eventually put in front of an audience at Playwrights, and we finished writing it before we ever showed it to a producer, or for that matter to anybody else. Wise Guys / Bounce / Roadshow was also different. I mean, Steve and I were talking one day, I guess after he had finished Passion, and he said, "I don't want to write another gloomy show. Have you ever heard of Wilson Meisner?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, would you be willing to read?" And I said, "Yeah, of course." So I read this partially fictitious celebration of Meisner and his brother that had first appeared as profiles in the New Yorker, and then we sort of went at it the same way we'd gone at Assassins, but I think we were both kind of aware of it. We were never quite settled on what it was we were trying to deliver to the audience, and we were very fortunate, I think, when the show wound up on Oscar Eustis's desk at the Public Theater, because his reputation as dramaturg is very well earned, and he really helped us focus our vision of what we were trying to accomplish. And John Doyle was totally in sync with Oscar's view of what we should be focused on. And so that was a writing collaboration in which eventually we were led to a certain extent by a brilliant producer and a brilliant director. So each of the three experiences was quite different.
Winds are blowing, sea was coming, sea was going. Next, roads are turning, journey with them, a little learning. Next.
John Weidman brought me a play, and it was a realistic play taking place on a boat in Ado Harbor, and the peace conference was on that boat. Commodore Perry was the host, and the Japanese sent a little boat out to persuade him not to land, and the whole play took place there. And I said, it's a great and interesting piece of history, and I don't think it will work as a play in popular terms, and I really do think it's a great musical. Dangerous as hell, but why don't we do it? And we did it.
And Steve, was he immediately excited at the prospect of
my memory's not that good. I don't know when Steve is immediately excited or not. I know that he finally goes to work on it.
Yeah.
And he really wrote a great score.
Yeah.
And he just absorbs everything.
Steve was reluctant. Steve did not dive into this one immediately. I don't know what Hal said, but I mean, Hal really had to kind of pull him into it. And as I said, there was a point where he got pulled across a line, and all of a sudden he was thrilled with the whole idea of it. But so my memory of the first meeting, which was in Hal's office, was of Steve being kind of reserved and, all right, not talk me into it. I mean, there was no arrogance in it, but just at all. But just, well, okay, how, like that. And again, as I say, it was all triangulated through Hal Prince at that point.
Pardon me, I was there.
You were where?
At the treaty house.
At the treaty
there
house.
was a tree.
Which was where?
Very near.
Over here.
Maybe over there, but there were trees then everywhere. May I show you, there were trees then everywhere.
But you were there.
And I was there. Let me show you. If you please.
Jonathan, with Pacific Overtures, it was like this kind of musical haiku. One had to devise something utterly and completely different, but also create the huge gulf between the authentic Japanese sounding stuff and the westernized influence. That was a huge
We
challenge.
were all insane. We were all dragged into it, kicking and screaming. I remember Boris Aronson saying, "What am I doing? I don't know anything about Japan. I have no business doing it." And we all felt the same. But of course, we were going to do anything that Hal wanted to do and anything that Steve wanted to do. We always have a preparatory meeting where he plays through the entire score for me,
Okay.
and I will ask questions. Some of them are dryly technical, or like, do you really mean F sharp here, or it should be an F natural, or what's the purpose of that chord? It seems a little out of place. Do you mean something by it? But mostly we will talk about subtext and character, the subtext being very important.
Johnny Booth was a handsome devil, got up in his rings and fancy silks, had him a temper but kept it level, everybody called him Wilkes. Why did you do it, Johnny? nobody agrees. You who had everything, what made you bring a nation to its knees? Some say it was your voice had gone, some say it was booze. Some say you killed the country, John, because of bad reviews.
One of the things that has always pleased me the most about Assassins is that it feels like it all came out of one pen, which is, of course, what you're aiming for. The self-protective conventional wisdom about these characters was that they had nothing in common with each other, and certainly nothing in common with the rest of us. It was as if they were like swine flu. It was they were like things which were aberrations. They caused enormous pain and grief nationally, but there was nothing to be learned really from looking at them. And our feeling was that if you put them together and did look at them, examined them as a group, something might emerge that would be useful to know in terms of how we adjusted what we told ourselves about who we were and how we behaved. That, and this sounds unbelievably pompous, but that would prevent anybody else from shooting the president. And so the structure of the piece is something that we worked out meticulously before anybody wrote anything, and we brought the characters together as strangers in a shooting gallery, then scattered them, and then really each had a sort of hermetically sealed scene or song, and then a second scene in which they interacted with one of the other assassins, then went off and tried to kill the president. But we knew, I'd be hard pressed to know exactly why, but it felt right, that we were not going to be dealing with scenes that evolved into songs, or with songs which ended and then turned into scenes. That the piece would have a kind of review-like structure which reinforced what we felt was this false notion that each of these people was an isolated instance of bad genes, and that if we sort of presented that to the audience and then broke it down, right? That, you get the song in the middle of the show where suddenly they all kind of look at each other and realize they're wearing the same T-shirt, sort of, and then off they go to Dallas.
It's an extraordinarily original show, and probably the most original since Company, I think, of his work and yours too now. That scene with Booth at the beginning seems to me the perfect marriage of book and music.
Well, that's
even before you'd begun the show.
It's funny. Steve wrote two songs while I was sort of writing the rest of the show. One was an opening number, which was replaced by another version of sort of the same thing, which is the Shooting Gallery song. But I felt like the place where he really hit his stride in terms of what the musical possibilities of the piece was in the Ballad of Booth. Especially when it was finally recorded with a full orchestra, and and the violin figures came in. You could hear this Americana, but applied to this horrifying event.
Damn my soul, if you must, let my body turn to dust. Let it mingle with the ashes of the country. Let them curse me to hell, leave it to history to tell. What I did well, and I did it for my country. Let them cry, dirty traitor, they will understand it later. The country is not what it was.
Johnny Booth was a headstrong fella. Even he believed
one of the great things with Steve, and it's almost invariably true, is there would be moments in writing Assassins where, in a conversation like that, I'd get off the phone and I would go, I don't know if was I clear? Did Steve understand what I was saying? And the song would come back, and not only would it deliver 100% of what I thought the moment was supposed to have in it, but there'd be another 175% other stuff that bubbles up out of Steve.
Damn you, Johnny, you pave the way for other madmen to make us pay.
We played these shows in our living room for friends. Every time we did a show, we'd have a little party, and I'd tell a story, and Steve would sing the material. And what was good about it is, for me, it rooted me into the storytelling, and I found in front of a room full of people, I could find what it was I hadn't confronted. That was its use to me.
Do you think Steve could have written more? Because he is
well, he's certainly got the best reputation artistically on the globe, hasn't he? And so if he had written more, he would have written more. Yeah, sure, anybody can write more. I think he writes slowly, and I think he backs into projects, though not always. Sometimes he's very enthusiastic. I mean, immediately knows why, and he's very stubborn about doing a project when he wants to do it, and very supportive of whatever that vision was. I'm thinking of something like Passion. That's a vision he really supported. I suppose he could have written more. He's written a lot, really, if you think about it.
I mean, I remember my father, Schuyler Chapin, working at Lincoln Center at the time that Sondheim and Richard Rodgers were writing Do I Hear a Waltz? And he ran into Dick Rodgers somewhere. And Rodgers was complaining about the fact that Sondheim's lyrics weren't coming in with regularity, because, you know, Richard Rodgers was a businessman who, I mean, he liked to think of composing like a business. And my father then said to him, well, when they come in, how are they? And Rodgers said, brilliant. It's like, they're late, but they're brilliant.
Yes.
You know, I think Sondheim may spend a lot of time getting engaged by a project. I mean, his story of not really wanting to do company, but saying to Hal Prince that he's willing to do company if Hal would agree to take on the girls upstairs that became Follies, which to me is fascinating, because, you know, if one thinks that he was actually writing company in essence to fulfill a bargain, amazing to think of what he came up with under those circumstances, but he had something very much at stake. You know, so I don't, in my experience, and again, my experience with him is very limited in terms of watching him work. I mean, he had 7 or 8 songs to write on Follies, so he didn't spend a lot of time being lazy. So my suspicion is that the times between projects may be the longer times, because he's waiting, as any artist would, what's going to be, what's the story, who are the people. I mean, the Meisner project was one that he had an interest in when he was in college, and Irving Berlin got there first. I mean, he called me one day when we represented Irving Berlin and said, I want to just ask you as a friend, is there anything around from Irving Berlin's version of the Meisner story? Which was an interesting question. And there were a couple songs, and I sent them to him because I said, you know, here's what he came up with. You know, something about the story of the Meisner brothers was just never left. You know, and in the interim years, how many shows did he do?
Well, it's not surprising that it stayed, because it's a great idea.
It's a great idea.
You know, the idea of the two sides of the American dream.
Exactly.
And perhaps that's why the Stephen Sondheim catalogue, you know, is so special. It's because each of these shows have been arrived at, you know, that the choices are so shrewd.
Also, you know, credit must be given to a man whose first show opened on Broadway in 1957, and whose new show opens in 2008. That's a career. And when you look at the shows that go along there, I mean, I don't know if you are this way, but I am at a point now where I start in my mind ticking off the Stephen Sondheim musicals. I usually forget 2 or 3.
Michael Cerveris, can you remember the first kind of awareness you had of Sondheim? Because a little bird told me that you were barely out of diapers when you played Bobby in company.
No, that was high school, actually, and that was the first time I ever sang Sondheim. But I actually was exposed to him much earlier than that. My father is a classical pianist and musician, and I remember him coming home. This was when we lived in Huntington, West Virginia, and coming home and bringing the vinyl LP of A Little Night Music home. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if that was the first thing he had heard, but I know that he was so excited by it and he sat me down literally and played the LP and sort of, talked me through what was going on musically in it, and that the entire score was written in waltz time. And from then on, Sondheim was like part of the furniture in our house.
For an actor-musician, I guess the real excitement about Sondheim must be the way words interact with music, mm-hmm. and the unique way in which he uses song. Surprising way, because he always subverts your expectations. Mm-hmm. You really don't know when the songs are coming.
I think for me the combination of the text and the music is the heart of what Sondheim is to me, and I think it's also why I was drawn to his writing in the first place, and B, why I've had whatever measure of success I've had with it has been because of that. Because I really have always felt like I'm an actor who can sing all right, mm-hmm. and my real entrance into a song is through the text, and lyrically I really feel like he's on a par with Shakespeare, and in terms of the wit and the technical proficiency that he brings to bear, but also just the incredible understanding of psychology. It's such great material, and that's how I kind of enter into working on anything of his. Really, is from and interestingly, I mean, he's a great stickler for detail in the music often, but not always when you think he will be. And at the end of the day, he really is first and foremost a theater person and has a story to tell, and anything that's going to get in the way of the actor moving the audience and telling the story to the audience, he will do away with. And so he doesn't care, I don't think, quite so much about whether the voice beautiful. He wants the character communicated.
Definitely, and defers to the book writer constantly.
Yeah.
That kind of talking to John Weidman about Assassins. Now, you played John Wilkes Booth. I was saying how I thought that the Booth scene and the Booth aria is one of the most wonderful, well, the whole piece is extraordinary, but one of the most wonderful marriages of dialogue, spoken word and song, mm-hmm. and how in that melody he ennobles Booth in a way that you don't expect him to, because here's a man who committed this earth-shattering act and horrific act, but somehow he allows him his moment of justification, of passion, of why he did it.
Right. Well, he does
that thrilling.
It is, and he does it with Sweeney Todd. He takes a man who commits horrific sort of acts, but he allows you to see the human being in that, and the accomplishment in Assassins, I think, is really remarkable what he and John did, because it would be so easy to let these people just be the monsters that they're sort of assumed to be, and then we don't learn anything from that. We don't ask ourselves what part we and our society plays in causing these situations to occur, and people to believe that this is their only option. Mm-hmm. The Ballad of Booth is brilliant because if you take it out of context and just sing it as a song, bar a line here or there, it's very easy to embrace the sentiment. The country's not what it was. People are taking it and twisting it to be their own thing, and we need to restore it to its fundamental pure intentions. That's not a difficult sentiment to agree with. Certainly wasn't a difficult sentiment to agree with during the Bush administration when we were doing it. So when you get the audience to kind of without being aware of it, start to sympathize with this character and then pull the rug out from under them and say, and this is where that leads. This is where that kind of uncritical, patriotic fever leads. Then you can open the possibility for someone actually reflecting on their lives and their society, and that is what the whole enterprise is about.
Attend the tale of Sweeney Todd. His skin was pale and his eye was odd. He shaved the faces of gentlemen who never thereafter were heard of again. He trod a path that few have trod, did Sweeney Todd, the demon barber of Fleet Street.
Jonathan Tunick, Sweeney Todd. I happen to think he's written 2 or 3 masterpieces, but I think Sweeney Todd is the one that people tend to latch on.
It is remarkable, isn't it? And
it's a remarkable sound world too, because it is very operatic.
It is operatic, but not in the sense that most people think. It's not about operatic singing, but he does use classical forms to probably a greater extent than he ever had up to that time. There were big rondo forms, and that's what gives it its size. Yes, Sweeney should be a powerful baritone, and Joanna needs to be a coloratura, and the sailor should be some sort of tenor. But it's not really about opera singing.
I received a Western Union telegram. I was in Ireland with my family. I had come back from having done Gypsy in New York. We were back in Ireland again. I was making movies over in England and in France and everywhere. And I got a telegram in the middle of the night from the post office. The lady in the post office rang me up. It says, I've got a telegram here for you. It's from a Mr. Prince. And it was very late at night, you see, so I thought, well, maybe I'll keep it in the morning. Well, she said, would you like me to read it to you? I said, well, yes, just give me the gist of it. She said, well, he's talking about a show that he's going to be doing in New York, and he wondered if you'd be interested. And I said, well, did he give you a title for the show? And she said, it's called The Demon Barber of Fleet Street. So I thought, my goodness gracious me, I'd been brought up by with my nanny singing, Sweeney Todd will get you if you don't watch out, sort of thing. And I thought, oh, that's an interesting thought. My goodness. But anyway, I think I sent a telegram back to them. I finally got a copy of the telegram the next day, and I sent a telegram back saying I said, and who is playing Sweeney Todd? And who do I play? Or, because I didn't know who Nellie Lovett was.
Oh, Mr. Todd, I'm so happy I could eat you up, I really could. You know what I'd like to do, Mr. Todd, what I dream, if the business stays as good, where I'd really like to go in a year or so. Don't you want to know?
Of course.
It was really the one thing, I think, that sealed my position in the musical theatre. It wasn't just a flash in the pan. It wasn't just Mame, and it wasn't just Dear World or Gypsy. It was something of extraordinary substance that required a performance that only Stephen could have written, and he wrote it for me, and I did it, and it worked like gangbusters,
Yeah, she's such a complex character. There's so many layers to her.
The thing is that she was capable of anything if you would just look at her, if you would just marry her, if you would just love her, because she just adored him. And after all, you have to remember what she did for him. I mean, when he was away, she got rid of the wife, and she did all those things, and in the hopes that one day he'd come back, and he does. So she's not going to let him out of her sight.
I think one of the brilliant numbers in the piece, By the Sea, where she barely pauses for breath.
There isn't any breath, let me tell you. Stephen said, I've written you a song, Angie, he said, that has and no time to breathe at all. It's absolutely true.
Because I guess if she did breathe, he'd jump in and say, no, I don't want to do
Yes,
this.
exactly.
By the sea, Mr. Todd, that's the life I covet. By the sea, Mr. Todd, oh, I know you'd love it. You and me, Mr. T, we could be alone in a house what we'd almost own down by the sea.
Anything you say.
Wouldn't that be smashing?
Was it a tough journey? Were there many, many changes? Or do you just take these things in your stride, I suppose?
Well, you do take them in your stride, and you know that kind of piece is obviously going to change in the course of rehearsing. Numbers will be introduced, be learnt and performed, and then suddenly they're out because they're too long. You know, the flagellation song of the judge was in, and then it was out.
Yes.
And because it was just,
Deliver Me.
Deliver Me, yes. Which, of course, I think was in the movie, if I'm not mistaken.
I think a clip of it is.
Maybe a
hint of it
little
is,
piece
yes.
of it, yes. But Hal is a real workman, as you know, and he had it all figured out in his head pretty well.
One of the staggering things in that show, which always, even now I know it's coming, always takes me by surprise, like all great work, is the end of the first act, where any other composer would have ended on Epiphany, on Sweeney's big number, but Steve pulls the rug from beneath you and ends with a music hall.
That's right.
Unbelievable.
Yes, yes, it is.
And
of course, it elevates the audience's attention and makes them roar with laughter.
Yeah.
And it's such a switch, such a total switch.
He never does what anybody else would do. I mean, look at my friends. Any other author would have put an epiphany right there, some sort of epiphany, a song about how I'm going to go out and kill everybody. Instead, he sings a love song to the razor.
These are my friends. See how they glisten.
Then it goes one step further. He's singing to the razor, and she's singing to him. And they're singing this rather erotic duet, but not to each other. She to him, him to the razor.
Does he still surprise you?
Yeah, every time. Every time. And I'll go right back to the first, Gypsy. I heard the cast album of Gypsy long before I saw the show. And when I went to see the show, not one song in the show was about what I thought it was going to be about, just from hearing it. All I Need Now Is the Girl is not about a guy who's planning this great act. It's about the girl that you don't see on the album who's sitting in the corner, and it's all about how she's not going to get to go. Together, wherever we go, is all about how they don't get along. Everything's oblique.
And this is why with it's a substantial body of work, but given his legendary status, one would almost expect it to be bigger. And it's because everything is so individual and surprising.
Every show has a language of its own.
Yeah. And yet you still know it's him.
And still you know it's him. And within each score, each song has its own identity. It's a very rare thing to achieve.
A customer. Wait, what you rush, what you hurry? You gave me such a fright, I thought you was a ghost. Half a minute, can't you sit you down, sit. All I meant is that I haven't seen a customer for weeks. Did you come here for a pie, sir?
Patti LuPone, can you remember when you first encountered his work, Steve Sondheim's work, when he, as a composer lyricist, so not West Side Story, not even Gypsy, but as a composer lyricist?
Probably Sweeney Todd. Probably Sweeney Todd.
And what was the impression?
I was gobsmacked, as you people say over there. I was stunned by Hal's production and by the score and the lyrics and the complexity of the piece and the sheer theatricality of it and the grandness, the operatic scope of it. And stunned. You
interestingly enough, had two big bites at Nellie Lovett in Sweeney Todd. And it was interesting to see your interpretation from that New York Philharmonic semi-staged performance to the John Doyle reductionary kind of Sweeney. What kind of development did you make? Because it seemed to me much darker. What did you discover about Nellie in that process?
Well, I never saw her as the flighty Nellie Lovett. And I suppose the more rehearsal I have, the more I understand. I'm a slow learner. And Steve said to me, I think in the New York Phil production, that Nellie was a pragmatist and she would get what she wanted. She was actually the villain of the piece. And I think that became much clearer in John's production. I am only as good as my director, really. There's only so much I can accomplish by myself, and then I really need a director. And the better the director, the better my performance is going to be. And John is, really an extraordinary director who simplified the experience, took away the scenery, took away the wig, took away the props, so that it was easier to find the essence of the character. And I think I sacrificed some of the humor for the darker side.
The first Broadway show I saw, period, was Sweeney Todd, and the first time I'd seen a Sondheim show done professionally. And I sat in the next to the last row of the then Eurus Theatre and saw Len Cariou and Angela Lansbury do it, and was riveted, just spellbound, and went back another 6 times in the next year or so, and knew the record inside out and knew their performances inside out. So it was a tremendous help to me that the production was so different and so rethought.
Yes, there's a wonderful modesty about him being prepared to rethink his pieces as well.
Yeah.
And of course something I hadn't realised, which we're realising more and more, is that all these pieces are basically intimate pieces. They're all about people's interaction.
Yeah.
And when John Doyle did Sweeney Todd, for example, which I saw at the Watermill Theatre in Newbury, and I had to be sort of dragged there actually, because I adore the piece, and I thought, I don't think I want to hear this with a handful of instruments.
Yeah.
And I came out thinking, how strong is this piece that it can be reinvented like that and still maintain, in fact, intensify. Now,
I was told
I
was told by the producers of the film that it was seeing that convinced them that they could make a film version of it, because they understood that it could, bear any number of interpretations, and the piece is that strong.
Was it easier to get inside Sweeney's head, losing all the Grand Guignol kind of operatic feel of the piece, the scale of those orchestrations, and
I think so. I mean, Hamlet's been done for 500 years, and people will continue to play Sweeney forever. But so that was very helpful to kind of strip everything away and just find out essentially what is happening in these scenes, and not what do we remember it being about, but what is it actually about. And we discovered, for example, in the Worst Pies scene, we started out assuming, okay, well, we'll need a rolling pin, we'll need some dough, we'll need some stuff, and little by little as we were working, we realized, well, actually, she never says that she's making meat pies right now. That's just what we've always seen and assumed is happening there, but she doesn't say that at all, and in fact, that's not what's going on. What's going on is she's...
Susan Beethoven is on stage. Susan Beethoven is on stage.
You don't hear that every day.
My time,
The purpose of that scene is to convey, for Sweeney to learn what's happened to his wife, and to establish characters and things. And so we started stripping things away more and more, and it absolutely helped me make a more personal, present connection with Sweeney's story.
Which is one of the reasons I think why John Doyle got rid of many of the laughs in the piece. I was a little uncomfortable at first about that, because apart from Little Priest, which is the ultimate kind of pulling the rug from beneath you after Epiphany.
And God, you need it at that point.
You really do. But he did take out a lot of, and certainly in Patti LuPone's performance, compared to what she did at the Lincoln Center, it was completely and utterly different. So I guess a different treatment needs, a darker.
Well, and he was starting from, I guess the simplest way to say it is we just took everything in this story seriously. If you really are talking about people who really are going to kill people and really are going to grind them up and serve them to other people, there are funny things, there are macabre things, but there's a real horrific thing that's happening. And he said early on, John Doyle said, I don't want people to be able to laugh their way out of recognizing the reality of the situation. I don't want to let people off the hook that much. And so the laughs that you get in that production really are ones that you need just to make it endurable, over the course of the evening. And to me, it really matches Steve's sense of humor and his wit. There's that utter black, just bleak view of human nature and the possibility for happiness in life, married to incredible wit and cleverness that, to me, that kind of wit and cleverness, even though it's often used in a really acerbic, bitter, sarcastic way, its existence alone is somehow positive and hopeful, because it speaks to something creative and ennobling in human beings, that they're capable of that kind of thing. And if they're capable of that, they're capable of thinking the way to a better place.
Kind of bare, isn't it? I never did like a bare room. Oh well. We'll find some nice little knickknacks.
Why doesn't the beetle come? Before the week is out, that's what he said.
And who says the week's out yet? It's only Tuesday. Easy now, hush, love, hush. Don't distress yourself, what's your rush? Keep your thoughts nice and lush.
I think Steve, by virtue of some innate understanding he has of how human beings behave in all kinds of different situations and in all kinds of different circumstances, really revolutionized the idea, at least for a certain group of people, of what musical theater is capable of. And it's not about serious versus funny, but it is about importance, that a musical can be a genuinely important piece of theater, as opposed to simply a distraction, or and which is not to say that Oklahoma is not an important piece of theater, but it is. There's a complexity and an ambition to all his work, which I think completely changed the way people think about what a musical can do. None of the shows that I've written with him could have been written with anybody else, and it makes it difficult if you're me, and it sort of makes me, to a certain extent, grateful that I'm 63 and not 33. When you've had the experience of dealing with somebody with those skills and predispositions, it's very hard to make other kinds of marriages and really savor the experience of creation. I mean, Hal Prince said to me in 1974, I guess, we had gone to L.A. on a casting expedition for Pacific Overtures, and Steve had gone off to do something. Hal and I were having dinner, and at one point he said, Steve is the only genuine genius I've ever met. He didn't define genius, but he was separating Steve from the rest of everybody that he dealt with in the theater. And I think that's appropriate.
I think that I can't sum him up. He's deceptive. He reads the newspaper and it all ends up crumpled, and he reads a newspaper like the Times over days and days and days. He doesn't read books. He has a font of information that's extraordinary, made more extraordinary because he doesn't do a lot of that research and reading. He's smart as hell, and he is brave. I would say Steve is incapable of following any other star but his own, of course in collaboration with people. But, I mean, he might like to have a show run 20 years, but he wouldn't do anything to make that happen. He'd just write the show he wants to write. And that's why he's Steve.